Ukraine's second biggest city, now the latest front line in the war with Russia. Street battles are now underway after Russian tanks and troops moved into Kharkiv on Sunday, some of their hardware destroyed in fierce fighting. People have been told not to leave their homes, but not just because of the military advance. Ukraine says Russian forces blew up this pipeline nearby, and people have been warned to keep inside to protect themselves from the toxic smoke. The blast in the pipeline in Kharkiv happened during a wave of Russian attacks on airfields and oil and gas facilities. Analysts say this is a new phase in the invasion. Russian troops are trying to take over the Kiev airbase, where an oil depot is on fire after being hit by a Russian missile. The site is 40 kilometres from the capital, Kyiv.
You have seen that during the whole day there were attacks from ballistic missiles, including to our airport, which we have contained, and now they are continuing shelling. But all will be good. The night will not be easy, not here, neither in Kyiv, but we will withstand.
Air raid sirens have been sounding throughout Kyiv, where there have been loud explosions. People are crowding into shelters and metro stations below ground. Fears of an all-out assault on the city haven't yet materialised, and a curfew's in place until Monday morning. But Russia maintains it has made advances into and around several cities in the south. Its defence ministry released these pictures of its forces between Kherson and Bryansk.
I pay special tribute to those heroically performing their military duty during this special operation to provide assistance to the People's Republic of Donbass these days.
The Kremlin said a Russian delegation had arrived in Belarus for talks with Ukrainian officials, a move rejected by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
If you didn't have these aggressive actions from your territory, we could have talked in Minsk, in your town. This is the truth. That's the situation to talk between neighbours. And now you have made your choice. It depends on you. That's why now we are saying no to Minsk. Other places could be a springboard for talks. We want to talk, we want to meet, to end this war.
Zelensky has accused the Russians of deliberately choosing tactics to hurt his people in a conflict that's already displaced 250,000 of them. Alexi O'Brien, Al Jazeera.
Let's take a look at who controls what right now in Ukraine. Russian troops began attacking the country on Friday from Belarus in the north, Russia in the east, and Crimea in the south. Here's the full range of Russia's offensive marked in red. Russian forces also entered from neighbouring Belarus through the area around the Chernobyl nuclear plant on the second day of the invasion. It's the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Street fighting has broken out in the capital, Kiev, where people have been urged to take shelter. That's despite the fact Ukrainian troops blew up several bridges leading into the city to slow the progress of Russian armoured columns. Well, Andrew Simmons is in Lviv in western Ukraine with more on the pipelines that have been targeted.
Well, south of Kiev, there has been an oil facility blown up. The night sky illuminated by that fire, which was, well, as far as I'm hearing now, is still ablaze. Also a pipeline near Kharkiv. Kharkiv, that's the second city in Ukraine, in a terrible state, not helped by this gas pipeline being attacked. The first deputy head of administration in Kiev is saying that there are clashes with saboteurs, as they're called, thought to be undercover Russians who are using sleeper cells or something like that, which is constantly referred to by the information ministry and other officials. But these so-called saboteurs are set upon by anybody available. That can be civilians with free handout guns, or it can be other parts of the security forces. That's happening a lot, and we're hearing that some of the explosions, some of the attacks are down to these saboteurs. They could be special forces. We don't have full details on it, but what we do know as a network is that it is incredibly dangerous anywhere, particularly in Kyiv, obviously, but anywhere in the country, not just because of the Russian attacks, but because of the level of stress and tension with field operations going on to try to find these saboteurs or to try to find aggressors as they're described. We're the latest, one of the latest to come into a situation. It by no means is it the most serious, but our arrival in this city last night was within minutes of the curfew coming down, the right side of the curfew coming down, but we were effectively ambushed by armed police from several directions, all with automatic guns. Their safety off, definitely. The pistol at the head of my colleagues and indeed myself, the pistol was off safety and directly pointed, and they were really stressed. It was, if you hadn't had your arms up, we felt that the worst could have happened. It went on for nearly half an hour. We obviously had our bona fide documents with us, but this went on.
Dorsa Jabari joins us live now to get the view from the Russian capital. So, Dorsa, as far as this ongoing discussion of the possibility of talks, what more are we hearing on that from the Russian side?
Well, according to the Kremlin, they were waiting for the Ukrainians to respond until 12 GMT today. There is a Russian delegation made up of members from the president's office, as well as the foreign ministry and the Russian defense ministry, who are now currently in the southeastern city of Gomel in Belarus. They said that they are there because they are ready to have talks with the Ukrainian officials. Now, they picked the city of Gomel according to the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. He says that the Ukrainians chose to have the talks be held in that city instead of the capital Minsk. But the Ukrainians officials have said that that is not true, and that the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says that they are not going to have any kind of discussions with Russian officials in Belarus. He provided a number of other cities as possibilities, but he said that they will not go to Belarus to have any kind of dialogue with Russia, because Belarus is one of the countries that Russian troops have entered into Ukraine from, and he says we cannot, in all honesty, have any contact with them, and to go into that area would be very much against what they believe in. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, we understand, has just spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who has offered to mediate the talks between Ukraine and Russia. And Vladimir Putin has said that, according to the Kremlin, during that conversation, he again said that the Russians are ready to talk to Ukrainian officials, but in Belarus. And he also explained the ongoing operation that the Russian military is involved with in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine to the Israeli Prime Minister. This all, of course, is at a time when the Russians have said that they are not willing to stop the military operation, as they call it, in Ukraine, even if they do have any kind of dialogue with the Ukrainian officials. But what is not clear is who do they want to talk to within the administration in Kiev, because Vladimir Putin has said that he doesn't recognize Vladimir Zelensky as a legitimate leader, and he is just a puppet of the West. He questions his legitimacy on a regular basis. So the Kremlin hasn't specified who they're willing to have talks with, but in the meantime, they said that if any talks continue, the military operation will not stop.
Dorsa, thank you. Dorsa Jabari in Moscow for us. Our German Chancellor Olaf Schultz has announced a major boost to defence spending. That's after the rare move to allow military aid to be sent to Ukraine. Schultz warned further measures could be placed on Russia if it fails to change course.
Doch schon sehr bald.
The sanctions package against Russia is unprecedented. Putin will not change his actions overnight, but very soon the Russian leadership will feel the high price they will pay. Our sanctions do work. Its financial sector has been hit hard in recent days. It was Putin, not the Russian people, who decided to start a war.
Well, Dominic Kane joins me live now from Berlin for more on that speech from the German Chancellor. So, Dominic, we saw quite a hardening of Germany's position there from Mr. Schultz, particularly in the area of German defence spending.
What we heard from Chancellor Schultz is something that we've heard from very few German chancellors since the end of the Second World War, an open call for rearmament of the German military, but this time not as an agent of aggressive intent by the German government, rather as a reassurance to EU allies and specifically NATO allies. What we also heard from Mr. Schultz is a determination as soon as possible to meet the requirement that was agreed to by Angela Merkel back in 2014 at the Wales NATO summit. 2% of the budget of this country to be spent on defence. Angela Merkel had the best part of 8 years to achieve it and never could. Now, Mr. Schultz says that the situation in Ukraine is so bad that Germany must meet it as quickly as possible, investing 100 billion euros in the German military in the coming years. And there were also many messages from Mr. Schultz to Vladimir Putin, very unambiguous messages to Vladimir Putin, effectively saying that Mr. Schultz believed that Vladimir Putin is intent on building his own personal empire with what he called spheres of influence for the Russian Federation, harking back to the bad old days, as it were, of the Cold War. And so what we have here, Hazem, is effectively Olaf Scholz ripping up the strategic playbook that successive German governments have worked by since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since the end of the Cold War, a completely different direction. And it's not just insofar as defence spending is concerned. There is also, in its way, a reference, perhaps a coded reference to the policy of Angela Merkel. You have from Mr. Scholz an acceptance that Germany is over-reliant on Russian gas. We knew already that in the course of the last few days that he'd said that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline linking Russia with Germany was not going to be switched on. The certification process was gone until further notice. But he's gone much further than that and said that Germany intends as fast as possible to build 2 very large new liquid natural gas terminals and then to buy in as much LNG from other worldwide suppliers, again, as fast as possible, in order to try to reduce as much as possible the reliance that Germany has on Russian natural gas. Remember, it's a very large fraction of Germany's energy is currently supplied by Russia. So very much we heard Mr. Schultz talk about turning points, that this is what the war in Ukraine is, a turning point for Germany. And his speech marks a turning point for Germany, a real, as I said before, a ripping up of the playbook that successive governments have worked by. That is how important what's happened today in Parliament was.
Dominic Kane, live for us in Berlin. Thanks, Dominic.